The world talks endlessly about climate change. Every year, new conferences are organized, new promises are made, and new reports are published. Yet, in many parts of the world, deserts continue to expand, and forests continue to disappear. Burkina Faso has chosen a different path. Instead of relying only on speeches and declarations, the country has launched an ambitious national campaign to restore its land. In 2023, Burkina Faso set a goal of planting 5 million trees. In 2024, that target increased to 6 million. By 2025, the country announced an even more ambitious objective of 20 million trees, with plans to expand the effort further in 2026. What makes this initiative unique is not only the number of trees being planted. Under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traore, many of these trees are intended to serve a second purpose. They are expected to become living sources of medicine for communities across the country. This means the campaign is not only about fighting desertification, it is also about improving public health and restoring traditional African knowledge that has been passed down for generations. If you enjoy discovering real African success stories that rarely make international headlines, be sure to subscribe and join us for more. The urgency of this mission becomes clear when we examine the environmental situation facing Burkina Faso. Between 2000 and 2022, the country lost nearly 1.84 million hectares of forest. On average, around 83,000 hectares disappeared every year. Agriculture expansion, firewood harvesting, mining activities, population growth, uncontrolled grazing, and bushfires have all contributed to this decline. The consequences are serious. As forests disappear, soils become weaker, water becomes scarcer, and farming becomes more difficult. Across the Sahel region, desertification continues to threaten livelihoods and food security. For Burkina Faso, restoring trees is no longer an environmental choice. It has become a national necessity. By 2023, Burkina Faso had already begun to demonstrate that reforestation could become more than an annual environmental event. The country launched a national effort to plant 5 million trees, sending a message that restoring degraded land would become a long-term priority rather than a symbolic gesture. 1 year later, the ambition grew. In 2024, the target increased to 6 million trees. Authorities moved the National Tree Day celebration to June instead of August, so that young trees could benefit from the early rainy season and develop stronger roots before the long dry months arrived. This decision reflected a practical approach focused on survival rather than publicity. Then came an even more ambitious objective. For 2025, Burkina Faso announced a nationwide goal of planting 20 million trees. Within that campaign, one challenge attracted particular attention: planting 5 million trees in a single hour between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning during National Tree Day. What makes this campaign different is the scale of public participation. Artists, students, civil servants, local leaders, traditional authorities, religious figures, businesses, and ordinary citizens have all been encouraged to take part. Tree planting is no longer presented as a task reserved for environmental agencies. It is being promoted as a civic responsibility shared by the entire nation. Across the country, communities are creating small forests, roadside plantations, institutional woodlots, and medicinal gardens. The objective is not only to increase the number of trees, but also to create a national culture of environmental stewardship. For many observers, the most remarkable aspect of this movement is that it transforms reforestation into a popular cause. Instead of waiting for outside solutions, Burkina Faso is mobilizing its own people to restore its own land. That shift from dependence to participation may ultimately become one of the most important achievements of the entire campaign. One of the reasons Ibrahim Traore's environmental strategy has attracted attention is that it challenges a common weakness found in many reforestation campaigns. Too often, success is measured by the number of trees planted rather than the number of trees that survive. Traore has repeatedly emphasized that planting a tree is only the beginning. A tree that dies after a few months contributes little to restoring the environment. For that reason, Burkina Faso is increasingly focusing on long-term care, monitoring, and community responsibility. In public speeches, he has warned against what could be called ceremonial reforestation. Planting thousands of trees for a single event may create impressive images, but without maintenance, irrigation, and protection, those efforts can quickly disappear. His message is simple: a planted tree must become a living tree. This philosophy has influenced the way many projects are organized. Local committees are being encouraged to monitor newly planted areas. Communities are expected to participate in maintenance. Some reforestation sites include water infrastructure and follow-up systems designed to improve survival rates during the dry season. The government has also promoted the mapping and identification of planting sites. Rather than treating reforestation as a one-day activity, authorities increasingly view it as a continuous process that requires planning and accountability. This approach helps explain why the campaign is gaining credibility among supporters. The objective is not merely to produce impressive statistics. The objective is to restore ecosystems that can survive for decades. For Ibrahim Traore, environmental success cannot be measured on the day a tree enters the ground. It must be measured years later when that tree is still providing shade, protecting soil, conserving water, and supporting the community around it. In that sense, caring for trees becomes a reflection of caring for the future itself. Perhaps the most innovative aspect of Burkina Faso's reforestation strategy is the decision to transform tree planting into a public health initiative. In 2025, the country introduced a new focus on medicinal plants through the creation of community medicinal groves. Rather than planting trees solely for environmental restoration, authorities began promoting species that could also provide health benefits for local populations. The idea is both simple and ambitious. Every province is expected to develop medicinal plant gardens, with the possibility of expanding the model to individual departments in the future. These spaces are designed to preserve valuable plant species while making traditional remedies more accessible to nearby communities. This approach is especially important in rural areas where access to healthcare services can be limited. Medicinal trees and plants have long played a role in African traditional medicine. By cultivating them systematically, Burkina Faso hopes to preserve knowledge that might otherwise disappear. Several native species are valued for their nutritional and medicinal properties. The baobab tree, for example, is known for its nutrient-rich fruit and leaves. Neem is widely recognized for its traditional medicinal uses and environmental resilience. Tamarind and other local species also provide benefits that extend beyond environmental restoration. The concept behind these medicinal groves goes far beyond healthcare. They also contribute to biodiversity conservation, carbon storage, soil protection, and climate resilience. A single tree can perform multiple functions within the community. This is why supporters often describe the initiative as creating living pharmacies. Instead of seeing trees only as environmental assets, Burkina Faso is treating them as resources that can support both human well-being and ecological recovery. In this model, every tree planted represents more than a contribution to a greener landscape. It becomes an investment in healthier communities, stronger local knowledge, and a more resilient future for generations to come. One of the deepest objectives behind Burkina Faso's tree planting campaign is not environmental restoration alone. It is also the recovery of knowledge that has been part of African societies for centuries. Long before the arrival of modern healthcare systems, communities across Africa relied on medicinal plants to treat illnesses, strengthen nutrition, and support daily well-being. This knowledge was passed from one generation to another and became an important part of cultural identity. Over time, however, much of this traditional knowledge began to lose visibility. Urbanization, modernization, and dependence on imported solutions often pushed local practices into the background. As a result, valuable experience accumulated over centuries risked being forgotten. Ibrahim Traore has argued that protecting medicinal plants is also a way of protecting cultural heritage. In his view, traditional knowledge and modern science should not be seen as opponents. Instead, they can complement each other and provide communities with more options for maintaining their health. This perspective helps explain why medicinal groves occupy such an important place in the country's environmental strategy. They are not only collections of trees, they are living repositories of knowledge, memory, and practical experience. The concept also connects directly to the idea of health sovereignty. Communities that preserve local medicinal resources may become less vulnerable to supply disruptions and external dependence. While modern medicine remains essential, strengthening local capacities can improve resilience, especially in rural areas. Beyond healthcare, the initiative reinforces confidence in African solutions to African challenges. It demonstrates that development does not always require abandoning local traditions. Sometimes progress can emerge from rediscovering and improving knowledge that already exists. For many supporters, this combination of environmental protection, cultural revival, and public health represents one of the most distinctive aspects of Burkina Faso's current approach. It is an attempt to build the future without disconnecting from the wisdom of the past. As Burkina Faso's reforestation campaign gains visibility, it has also attracted skepticism from some international observers. Critics often question whether such ambitious targets can produce lasting results or whether they are primarily symbolic political initiatives. One common criticism is that planting millions of trees in a short period may create impressive headlines without guaranteeing long-term environmental benefits. History offers many examples of reforestation campaigns that generated large numbers but failed to achieve meaningful survival rates. Supporters of Burkina Faso's approach respond by pointing to an important difference. The current strategy places increasing emphasis on maintenance, monitoring, community involvement, and long-term stewardship. The objective is not simply to put trees in the ground, but to ensure that they continue growing years after they are planted. Another criticism concerns the focus on medicinal plants. Some observers worry that emphasizing traditional remedies could be interpreted as a rejection of modern healthcare systems. However, the stated objective is not to replace modern medicine. Rather, it is to preserve useful local knowledge while allowing traditional and modern approaches to coexist. Supporters argue that communities benefit when they have access to multiple sources of healthcare and knowledge. A broader debate centers on the idea of development itself. Burkina Faso's strategy reflects a belief that local resources, local knowledge, and local participation should play a central role in solving national challenges. Some critics view this approach with caution, while supporters see it as a necessary step toward greater self-reliance. Regardless of political perspectives, one fact remains difficult to ignore. Burkina Faso is attempting to address environmental degradation, public health, and cultural preservation through a single integrated strategy. The ultimate judgment will not come from speeches or headlines. It will come from the condition of the land, the survival of the trees, and the impact these efforts have on future generations. Burkina Faso's campaign began as a response to environmental decline, but it has evolved into something much larger. What started as an effort to fight desertification is becoming a broader vision for national renewal. The country moved from planting 5 million trees in 2023 to 6 million in 2024 and announced a target of 20 million trees in 2025. Yet the most important achievement may not be the numbers themselves. It is the attempt to connect environmental restoration with public health, cultural identity, and community participation. Through the creation of medicinal groves, Burkina Faso is demonstrating that a tree can serve many purposes. It can protect soil, improve water retention, support biodiversity, store carbon, and provide valuable medicinal resources for local communities. The experience also offers lessons for other African countries. Sustainable progress does not always begin with large budgets or foreign solutions. Sometimes it begins with local resources, local knowledge, and citizens willing to contribute to a shared national goal. Whether every target is achieved remains to be seen. Long-term success will depend on maintenance, community commitment, and the survival of the trees that have been planted. However, one message is already clear. Burkina Faso is trying to build solutions from within. For supporters of Pan-African development, this effort reflects growing confidence in local capacities. As discussions about Africa's new development models continue, figures such as Captain Ibrahim Traore and Ibrahim Traore remain central to debates about the future. Whether viewed through the lens of Pan-Africanism or the African Union, this story highlights a path that many across Burkina Faso and Africa will continue to watch closely. If stories like this inspire you, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story. For years, the world has associated Burkina Faso with military coups, terrorism, and political instability. International headlines often focus on conflict, security crises, and foreign influence. Yet, while much of the world watches the battlefield, Captain Ibrahim Traore appears to be focusing on something far less dramatic but potentially far more important. Water, not gold, not foreign aid, not international loans. Water. What if the future of a nation does not begin with political speeches, but with reservoirs, irrigation systems, and productive farmland? What if the most powerful tool for national sovereignty is not a weapon, but the ability to feed your own people? That is the question at the center of one of the most ambitious projects unfolding in Africa today. While many African countries continue spending billions of dollars importing food, Burkina Faso is pursuing a different path. Ibrahim Traore is investing in water infrastructure with the goal of increasing agricultural production, creating jobs, and reducing dependence on external support. Today, we will explore why this strategy could become a turning point not only for Burkina Faso, but also for the wider African continent. If you enjoy thoughtful discussions about Africa's future and the leaders shaping it, be sure to subscribe and join our growing community. To understand why this project matters, we must first understand the challenge it is trying to solve. Africa possesses roughly 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. It has fertile soil, millions of farmers, and enormous agricultural potential. Yet many African nations still spend vast amounts of money importing food every year. This creates an important question. How can a continent with so much agricultural potential struggle to feed itself? The answer is not a lack of land or labor. In many cases, the real problem is infrastructure. Without reliable systems to capture, store, and distribute water, agricultural production remains limited. And when production remains limited, dependence on food imports continues. If Ibrahim Traore's water strategy appears unusual today, it is because it challenges how many governments have approached development for decades. When countries face food shortages, the most common response is often food imports, foreign assistance, or temporary support programs. While these measures may ease immediate pressure, they rarely solve the underlying problem. Traore appears to be following a different path. Instead of asking how Burkina Faso can purchase more food, he is asking how Burkina Faso can produce more food. That simple shift in thinking may be the foundation of his entire development strategy. At the center of this strategy is a powerful chain of cause and effect. Water supports production. Production generates income. Income creates jobs. Jobs strengthen communities. Strong communities support national stability, and stability helps protect sovereignty. This is why water has become such a strategic priority. For many years, farmers across Burkina Faso depended heavily on seasonal rainfall. Their harvests often rose or fell based on weather conditions beyond their control. A weak rainy season could reduce production. A drought could threaten livelihoods and local food supplies. Under those conditions, farming becomes uncertain. Traore's approach seeks to reduce that uncertainty. Reliable water supplies allow farmers to plan ahead. They can cultivate more land, extend growing seasons, and improve productivity. Greater productivity can increase household income and support local economic activity. This idea also changes the way sovereignty is understood. Many people associate sovereignty with military strength, borders, or political independence. Those factors matter. However, economic independence is equally important. A nation that depends heavily on imported food remains vulnerable to external shocks and rising global prices. A nation that can feed itself gains greater control over its future. That appears to be the larger objective behind Traore's strategy. He is not simply investing in water infrastructure. He is attempting to build the foundations of long-term self-reliance and national resilience. The vision behind Ibrahim Traore's water strategy is no longer just an idea. It is being translated into physical infrastructure across Burkina Faso. One of the most significant elements of this strategy is the nationwide effort to restore and expand water storage capacity. Rather than focusing only on building new projects, the government has also launched an ambitious program to rehabilitate existing dams that have gradually lost effectiveness over time. Many reservoirs across the country have suffered from sediment accumulation, reducing their ability to store water during the rainy season. As capacity declines, farmers have less access to water during dry periods, limiting agricultural production and economic activity. To address this challenge, Burkina Faso has introduced a plan to rehabilitate approximately 100 dams across the country. The objective is not simply to repair aging infrastructure. The larger goal is to strengthen the country's ability to capture, store, and distribute water more efficiently. Another major development has been the creation of the National Office for Dams and Hydro-Agricultural Development, known as ONBAH. The establishment of ONBAH represents an important shift in approach. Large development projects often fail when they depend entirely on political promises. Governments change, priorities shift, and projects lose momentum. By creating a dedicated institution, Burkina Faso is attempting to transform a political vision into a long-term national program. This may be one of the most important aspects of Traore's strategy. Infrastructure alone does not create transformation. Institutions create continuity. The mission of ONBA extends beyond construction. The agency is responsible for coordinating dam rehabilitation, supporting irrigation expansion, improving water management, and helping create conditions for increased agricultural production. For the first time in many years, Burkina Faso appears to be building a coordinated framework designed to turn water into a strategic national asset rather than a seasonal opportunity. The creation of ONBA was only the beginning. For a strategy of this scale to succeed, institutions must be supported by resources, equipment, and execution. That is why Burkina Faso has invested heavily in machinery and technical capacity to accelerate dam rehabilitation and hydro-agricultural development. The government understands that ambitious plans alone cannot transform an economy. Real change requires the ability to move from policy discussions to visible results on the ground. This investment reflects a broader objective. Burkina Faso is not attempting to build a few isolated water projects. It is trying to create a national system capable of supporting agricultural growth across multiple regions. But why does this matter so much? Because a dam is far more than a concrete structure. Stored water becomes productive farmland. Productive farmland becomes harvests. Harvests become income. Income creates economic activity throughout local communities. When irrigation expands, farmers gain opportunities to cultivate crops beyond the traditional rainy season. Land that once remained unused during dry months can continue generating value throughout the year. The impact extends far beyond agriculture itself. Higher production creates opportunities for traders, transport operators, food processors, market vendors, and small business owners. As money circulates through local economies, entire communities benefit from increased economic activity. This is why many local residents view these projects with optimism. They are not celebrating engineering achievements alone. They are celebrating the possibility of greater opportunity. For many young people, the greatest challenge is not a lack of ambition. It is a lack of economic options. When communities can generate income locally, fewer people feel compelled to leave in search of opportunity elsewhere. In that sense, water becomes more than a resource. It becomes a tool for job creation, community development, and economic empowerment. And that may be exactly what makes this strategy so important for Burkina Faso's future. The economic benefits of water infrastructure extend beyond higher agricultural production. They also influence social stability in ways that are often overlooked. When people have access to work, they gain more than income. They gain confidence, purpose, and a stronger connection to their communities. Families are better able to plan for the future, invest in education, and improve their quality of life. This is particularly important for young people. Across many parts of Africa, one of the greatest challenges is not a shortage of talent or ambition. It is the shortage of opportunities. When jobs are scarce and economic prospects appear limited, many young people feel pressured to leave their communities in search of a better future. Some move to cities. Others leave their countries entirely. As a result, rural communities often lose valuable workers and experience slower economic development. This is where Traore's water strategy takes on a broader significance. By supporting agricultural growth and local economic activity, water infrastructure can help create conditions that encourage people to remain and invest in their own communities. The connection between development and security is often underestimated. Most discussions about national security focus on military operations, weapons, and border protection. These elements are important. However, long-term stability also depends on whether citizens believe they have a future worth protecting. Communities with jobs, businesses, and productive farmland tend to be more resilient than communities facing persistent economic hardship. This does not mean dams can solve every security challenge facing Burkina Faso. They cannot, but they can help address some of the underlying economic pressures that contribute to instability. That may be why Traore's strategy is attracting attention across Africa. While many leaders focus primarily on immediate crises, Burkina Faso appears to be investing in conditions that could support long-term stability. In this vision, water is not only a development resource, it is also part of a larger strategy to strengthen the nation from the ground up. Not everyone views Ibrahim Traore's strategy through the same lens. In much of the Western media, discussions about Burkina Faso often focus on political issues, military rule, democratic concerns, and security challenges. Critics argue that long-term development requires strong institutions, political accountability, and respect for civil liberties in addition to economic reforms. These concerns deserve consideration. No country can achieve lasting progress through infrastructure projects alone. Economic development, political stability, effective governance, and public trust must work together. At the same time, supporters of Traore argue that an important part of the story is frequently overlooked. While international attention often centers on political controversies, Burkina Faso is also investing in agriculture, water management, and productive infrastructure. From this perspective, the country's efforts to strengthen food production and reduce dependence on imports deserve serious examination. A balanced assessment requires avoiding both extremes. Traore should not be portrayed as a flawless leader capable of solving every challenge facing Burkina Faso. But neither should every development initiative be dismissed because of political disagreements. The most useful question is not whether people support or oppose Traore personally. The real question is whether these projects produce measurable results. Will farmers have greater access to water? Will food production increase? Will rural incomes improve? Will communities become more resilient over time? Those are the indicators that will ultimately determine success or failure. Years from now, observers may look beyond today's political debates and focus on a simpler question. Did Burkina Faso become stronger, more productive, and more self-reliant because of these investments? That is the test that matters most. As we reach the end of this story, one thing becomes clear. The real significance of Ibrahim Traore's water strategy is not the dams themselves. It is the vision behind them. For decades, discussions about development in Africa have often focused on aid, loans, and external support. Burkina Faso is attempting to explore a different path. Instead of concentrating solely on consumption, it is investing in the ability to produce. That is why water matters. Water supports agriculture. Agriculture supports livelihoods. Livelihoods support stability. And stability creates the conditions for genuine sovereignty. Whether this strategy ultimately succeeds remains uncertain. The dams must continue operating. Irrigation systems must expand. Farmers must increase production. Communities must experience measurable improvements in their daily lives. Those outcomes will determine the true legacy of Captain Ibrahim Traore. Yet, regardless of the final results, an important conversation has already begun. Can African nations strengthen their future by investing more heavily in productive infrastructure? Can food security become a central pillar of national sovereignty? Can the ideals of Pan-Africanism be translated into practical policies that improve the lives of ordinary citizens? These questions extend far beyond Burkina Faso. They matter to the African Union, to advocates of a Pan-African future, and to everyone interested in what many describe as an Africa new era of self-reliance and development. Perhaps that is why the actions of Ibrahim Traore continue attracting attention across the continent. The future will reveal whether this vision delivers lasting change. But for now, Burkina Faso is offering a powerful idea. A nation becomes stronger when it can feed, employ, and empower its own people. If you enjoyed this analysis, be sure to subscribe and join us for future discussions. While many African nations still wait for food shipments and foreign aid to survive difficult seasons, something very different is quietly happening inside Burkina Faso. In a country often described by international headlines as poor, unstable, and dangerous, Captain Ibrahim Traore is focusing on something most powerful nations rarely talk about anymore: water, soil, farmers, food, At first glance, restoring old dams may not sound revolutionary. There are no luxury skyscrapers, no billion-dollar technology parks, and no glamorous international conferences. But for millions of ordinary Africans, especially those living in rural communities, water is life itself. A dam is not just concrete. It is survival during the dry season. It is food during difficult months. It is protection against hunger, poverty, and displacement. For decades, many African countries became trapped in a cycle of dependence. Despite having fertile land and millions of hardworking farmers, they continued importing food from abroad while accepting aid packages from Western governments and international organizations. The system kept many countries alive, but it rarely helped them stand on their own feet. When global crises happened, African families suffered first. The Russia-Ukraine war exposed this reality even more clearly. Food prices exploded across Africa. Fertilizer became expensive. Wheat imports slowed down. Suddenly, countries that depended heavily on foreign food realized how vulnerable they truly were. But instead of waiting for another shipment or another international promise, Burkina Faso began looking inward. Ibrahim Traore started speaking about food sovereignty, local production, and national dignity. His government began restoring neglected dams, expanding irrigation systems, and helping farmers continue working year-round. And that may be exactly why the world is paying attention. If you believe Africa can rise through its own labor, resources, and determination, subscribe to the channel and continue following these stories that are reshaping the future of the continent. For many people outside Burkina Faso, these old dams may look like forgotten pieces of infrastructure from another era. Some were built decades ago, during the 1960s and 70s, when leaders believed water systems could help protect communities from drought and food shortages. But over time, many of these dams were neglected, polluted, and slowly swallowed by mud and waste. In Ouagadougou and surrounding regions, years of sediment buildup reduced the storage capacity of several major reservoirs. Plastic waste, untreated garbage, and uncontrolled farming practices began choking the waterways. During heavy rains, the dams could no longer properly contain water, increasing the risk of flooding across nearby communities. During dry seasons, farmers struggled because there was not enough water left for irrigation. The environmental damage became impossible to ignore. Fish populations disappeared from some areas. Water quality dropped sharply because of pesticides and pollution. Farmers who depended on these water systems found themselves trapped between drought and uncertainty. Many young people abandoned agriculture completely because farming no longer looked like a future worth fighting for. What made the situation even more painful was that these dams were once symbols of hope. They were built to help communities survive difficult climates. They were meant to support food production and economic stability. Instead, they became symbols of neglect and broken systems. For years, governments discussed development, while basic infrastructure continued collapsing quietly in the background. Roads and politics dominated public conversation, but reservoirs, canals, and irrigation systems received little attention. That is why the restoration projects under Ibrahim Traore are attracting so much attention today. Burkina Faso is not simply cleaning old dams. It is trying to recover something far more important. The country is trying to restore its ability to feed itself, protect its farmers, and preserve the foundation of rural life before it disappears completely. What Ibrahim Traore understands is that no country can speak proudly about independence while depending on others to feed its population. That is why his government is treating agriculture and water management as matters of national security rather than secondary economic issues. Instead of focusing only on speeches and political slogans, Burkina Faso has started launching large-scale restoration projects across damaged reservoirs and irrigation systems. Old dams are being dredged to remove years of accumulated mud and waste. Water channels are being repaired. Irrigation systems are being expanded so farmers can continue producing food during dry seasons instead of relying entirely on rainfall. To some observers, these projects may appear simple, but for rural communities, the impact is enormous. A functioning reservoir means farmers can grow vegetables throughout the year. It means families can earn stable income. It means fewer young people abandoning villages because agriculture has become impossible. Ibrahim Traore has repeatedly linked food production to national dignity. His message is clear. A nation that cannot feed itself will always remain vulnerable to foreign pressure, global crises, and economic dependence. That philosophy strongly connects with Pan-Africanism and the legacy of leaders like Thomas Sankara, who also believed Africa must rely on its own people and resources. Across Burkina Faso, many supporters now see these dam restoration projects as more than infrastructure programs. They see them as symbols of recovery. Every canal cleaned, every borehole drilled, and every irrigation system repaired becomes proof that the country is trying to build from the ground up instead of waiting for outside rescue. This is one reason Ibrahim Traore continues gaining attention across Africa. While many leaders speak about development in abstract terms, he is focusing on practical systems that directly affect ordinary lives. Water for farmers, land for production, stability for rural families. And in a continent where food insecurity still affects millions, that approach carries enormous political and emotional power. One reason many people inside Burkina Faso continue supporting these agricultural reforms is because the government is not simply removing farmers from damaged areas and leaving them without options. In several regions where authorities needed to clear people away from old reservoirs and waterways, new solutions were introduced at the same time. Boreholes were drilled so farming communities could still access water during restoration work. New agricultural zones were prepared to allow displaced market gardeners to continue growing crops. Water storage tanks and irrigation systems were installed to help communities farm throughout the entire year, instead of depending only on seasonal rain. For ordinary citizens, these actions carry deep meaning. Many African communities are used to hearing promises during political speeches, but receiving very little practical support afterward. Here, people are seeing direct intervention that affects daily survival. They see water systems being repaired. They see farming land being protected. They see communities receiving tools to continue working instead of becoming dependent on aid. The impact is especially important for women and vulnerable families. In many rural parts of Burkina Faso, women are heavily involved in food production and local markets. When water becomes scarce, women and children often suffer first. Stable irrigation and nearby water access reduce that burden and improve household stability. These projects also matter for internally displaced families who fled violence and insecurity in different parts of the country. Agriculture creates opportunities for income, food production, and community rebuilding. In difficult environments, even small farming programs can restore dignity and hope. That is why many supporters of Ibrahim Traore describe these projects as more than economic reforms. They believe the government is trying to rebuild trust between the state and ordinary citizens. Instead of treating farmers as forgotten rural populations, Burkina Faso is increasingly presenting them as essential to national survival and long-term independence. Western governments and international media often criticize Ibrahim Traore and the military leadership in Burkina Faso. They raise concerns about democracy, press freedom, and the concentration of political power. Some foreign observers argue that military governments cannot provide long-term stability or economic progress for African nations. Those concerns are not completely without reason. Burkina Faso still faces enormous security challenges. Armed violence continues affecting several regions. Poverty remains widespread, and many infrastructure projects will require years before their full impact can be measured. Restoring dams alone will not magically solve every national problem. However, many supporters of Ibrahim Traore believe Western criticism sometimes ignores an important reality. For decades, countries across Africa followed political models encouraged by foreign powers while still remaining economically dependent and vulnerable to food insecurity. Elections were held, international conferences were organized, and development promises were repeated. Yet many rural communities still lacked reliable water systems and stable agricultural support. That is why Burkina Faso's current direction creates discomfort for some international actors. The concern is not only about politics, it is also about the possibility that another model could inspire other African nations. If Burkina Faso succeeds in improving food production through local infrastructure, irrigation, and national self-reliance, other countries may begin asking difficult questions about dependence on imported food and permanent foreign aid. Even critics must acknowledge one important point. Burkina Faso is attempting to rebuild basic national capacity instead of relying entirely on outside solutions. The country is trying to strengthen agriculture from the ground up, beginning with water, land, and farmers themselves. And whether one agrees with Ibrahim Traore or not, that effort is changing the conversation across Africa. Supporters of Ibrahim Traore often admit that Burkina Faso is still far from becoming a fully stable or wealthy nation. The country continues facing armed conflict, economic pressure, climate challenges, and limited financial resources. Building a self-sufficient agricultural system in such conditions is extremely difficult, and there is no guarantee of immediate success. Critics also argue that political reforms, democratic institutions, and freedom of expression remain important concerns that cannot simply be ignored in the name of national development. These are legitimate debates, and they continue shaping international discussions about Burkina Faso's future. But many ordinary Africans are looking at the situation from a different perspective. They are asking a simpler question. After decades of foreign influence, aid programs, and imported development models, why are so many communities still struggling to secure food, water, and economic stability? That question is one reason Ibrahim Traore's message resonates far beyond Burkina Faso. His supporters see a leader trying to rebuild national confidence from the ground up, not through dependence, but through production, not through endless promises, but through practical infrastructure that directly affects daily life. The restoration of dams alone will not transform Africa overnight, but it represents something symbolic and deeply important. It shows that development may begin with basic systems that many governments ignored for too long: water, farming, rural communities, local production. For many Africans, that approach feels more real than speeches written for international audiences. Burkina Faso is still a small nation facing enormous challenges. It is not the richest country in Africa. It does not control global financial institutions, and it does not possess the political influence of major world powers. Yet, under Captain Ibrahim Traore, the country is attempting something many people once believed was impossible. It is trying to build self-reliance from the ground up. The restoration of dams, expansion of irrigation systems, and direct support for farmers may seem simple compared to the grand promises often discussed in international meetings. But for ordinary people, these projects represent survival, dignity, and hope for the future. Across Africa, millions of people are watching closely. They are watching because Burkina Faso is raising an uncomfortable but important question. Why should a continent with fertile land, natural resources, and hard-working people remain permanently dependent on imported food and foreign assistance? The answer offered by Ibrahim Traore and many supporters of Pan-Africanism is clear. Africa must invest in its own people first. It must protect its farmers, restore its infrastructure, and treat food production as part of national sovereignty. That vision connects deeply with the broader Pan-African movement, and with growing conversations inside the African Union about economic independence and regional self-reliance. No one knows exactly how this story will end. Burkina Faso still faces many risks, and success is far from guaranteed. But one thing is already certain. The conversation is changing. The idea of an Africa new, an Africa capable of feeding and sustaining itself, no longer feels impossible to millions of people across the continent. And perhaps that is why Ibrahim Traore has become such a powerful symbol far beyond Burkina Faso itself. If you want to continue following stories about Pan-African change, African resilience, and the future being shaped across the continent, subscribe to the channel and join us again for the next story. What China just delivered to Burkina Faso was not simply a donation worth 160 million CFA francs. It may be the beginning of one of the most important agricultural transformations the Sahel region has seen in decades. At first glance, the announcement sounded like another international aid story. China handed over tractors, seeders, fertilizers, threshers, and agricultural equipment to Burkina Faso in a ceremony held in Ouagadougou. But behind those machines lies something much larger than temporary assistance. This is now the third phase of a long-term agricultural cooperation program between Beijing and Ouagadougou. Since diplomatic relations resumed in 2018, thousands of hectares of rice fields have already been developed. Thousands of agricultural workers have been trained, and Chinese experts are now working directly on the ground to transfer farming technologies to local communities. For Captain Ibrahim Traore, agriculture is no longer just about food production. It is about sovereignty. Burkina Faso has spent years struggling with insecurity, poverty, food shortages, and dependence on foreign imports. Now, the government wants to build something different. It wants a nation capable of feeding itself. And that may explain why this partnership matters far beyond the value of 160 million CFA francs, which is roughly $274,000. Because what is happening in Burkina Faso today may not only change farming, it could reshape how many Africans think about independence, development, and economic survival in the years ahead. If you want to understand how Africa is quietly reshaping its future beyond Western influence, make sure to subscribe and stay with us until the end. The agricultural equipment delivered by China may appear modest when compared to billion-dollar infrastructure projects often discussed in international politics. But for many communities in Burkina Faso, these machines could transform everyday life far more directly than major diplomatic announcements ever could. The donation included tractors, motor cultivators, seeders, mowing machines, threshers, seed analysis equipment, fertilizers, and improved seeds. On paper, it is valued at more than 160 million CFA francs, or around $274,000. Yet the true significance of this support lies in what it represents. This was not a one-time humanitarian gesture. It was part of Phase 3 of the agricultural cooperation program between China and Burkina Faso, known as PCA-BF. That detail is critical because it shows long-term planning rather than symbolic diplomacy. For years, many farmers across Burkina Faso relied on manual labor or animal traction to cultivate their land. Harvesting often took too long. Storage systems were weak. Large portions of crops could be lost before reaching markets. In some areas, a lack of machinery limited how much land families could even cultivate during the rainy season. A single tractor may now allow an entire village to prepare fields faster. A seeder can improve planting efficiency. Better threshing equipment can reduce waste after harvest. Improved seeds and fertilizer can increase crop yields in regions already suffering from climate pressure and food insecurity. But perhaps the most important point is this: China is not only sending equipment, it is helping Burkina Faso build productive capacity. That changes the entire meaning of the partnership. Because emergency aid can feed people for a few weeks, but agricultural modernization can feed a nation for generations. For Ibrahim Traore, the agricultural crisis in Burkina Faso is not simply an economic issue. It is a question of national survival and political independence. For many years, Burkina Faso remained heavily dependent on imported food and international assistance. Rural communities struggled with rising fertilizer prices, weak infrastructure, poor irrigation systems, and limited access to modern farming equipment. In some regions, insecurity and violence pushed farmers away from their land altogether. The result was dangerous. Food shortages increased, prices became unstable. Poverty deepened in vulnerable communities, and like many countries across the Sahel, Burkina Faso faced the risk of becoming permanently dependent on external support. That is exactly the situation Ibrahim Traore says he wants to change. Since taking power, Traore has consistently promoted the idea that true sovereignty cannot exist without economic self-reliance. For him, national independence is not only about military strength or political speeches. A country that cannot feed its own people remains vulnerable no matter how many flags it raises. That philosophy explains why agriculture has become one of the central pillars of his national vision. Instead of focusing only on emergency aid, the government is pushing for mechanization, irrigation expansion, improved seed production, and local food systems capable of supporting long-term stability. The goal is clear. Burkina Faso must reduce dependence on foreign imports and strengthen domestic production. This approach also connects strongly with modern Pan-African ideas spreading across parts of West Africa. Many young Africans increasingly believe the continent must stop relying entirely on outside powers for food, technology, and development. And in that context, the tractors arriving from China are no longer just machines. They become symbols of a broader political message, a message that says Africa should not only survive, it should produce, build, and feed itself with dignity. What makes China's involvement in Burkina Faso different from many traditional aid programs is that Beijing is not focusing only on short-term relief. It is building systems designed to increase long-term production. That distinction matters enormously in a region like the Sahel. Since diplomatic relations between Burkina Faso and China resumed in 2018, cooperation has expanded far beyond simple donations. Thousands of hectares of rice fields have been developed with Chinese technical assistance. Nearly 7,500 agricultural workers and technicians have reportedly received training. Chinese specialists are now working directly inside farming communities to transfer production methods and modern agricultural technologies. In 2025 alone, close to 70 Burkinabe agricultural officials and technicians traveled to China for advanced training. They studied food security systems, crop preservation, agricultural processing, cotton cultivation, and Juncao technology, which is used to improve agricultural productivity and livestock support. This approach reflects a very different philosophy from emergency food assistance. Emergency aid may help populations survive temporary crises, but it does not necessarily create self-sufficiency. China appears to be focusing instead on helping Burkina Faso produce more food independently over time. That includes training local experts, modernizing farming methods, improving irrigation systems, and expanding mechanized agriculture. In practical terms, this means Burkina Faso is not only receiving tractors and fertilizer, it is also receiving technical knowledge, operational skills, and production strategies that could continue functioning long after the original equipment is delivered. For many supporters of this partnership, that is the most important aspect. Because teaching a country how to strengthen its own agricultural system may ultimately be more valuable than any short-term financial donation. And for a region facing food insecurity, climate pressure, and instability, long-term productive capacity may become one of the most powerful forms of national defense. The food crisis across the Sahel has become one of the defining challenges of the region. And for Burkina Faso, agriculture is no longer simply about economic development. It is increasingly tied to national stability itself. For years, countries across the Sahel have faced a dangerous combination of insecurity, climate pressure, rising food prices, and rural displacement. Armed violence forced many farmers away from their land. Droughts reduced harvests. Entire communities struggled to maintain basic agricultural production. In Burkina Faso, some fertile areas became difficult to cultivate because of insecurity. Young people increasingly left rural regions searching for work elsewhere. Meanwhile, dependence on imported food continued to grow, leaving the country vulnerable to global price shocks and supply disruptions. That is why the government now sees agricultural modernization as a strategic necessity. Mechanization plays a major role in that strategy. In many villages, farming is still done largely by hand or with animal traction. Preparing land can take weeks. Harvesting is slow. Crop losses remain high. Productivity stays limited even when farmers work extremely hard. Modern equipment changes that equation. A tractor can prepare larger fields much faster. Seeders improve planting efficiency. Better harvesting and processing equipment reduces waste. Improved seeds and fertilizers increase yields even under difficult climate conditions. But beyond economics, there is also a deeper social impact. If agriculture becomes more productive, rural communities become more stable. Young workers may choose to remain in farming instead of leaving. Food prices become more manageable. Governments reduce pressure on imports and emergency aid. This is why some observers believe the real battle for the Sahel may not ultimately be fought only with weapons. It may also be fought with food production, water systems, agricultural technology, and the ability of nations to feed their own populations under difficult conditions. As China deepens its agricultural partnership with Burkina Faso, reactions from parts of the Western world have become increasingly divided. Some analysts argue that Beijing is not simply helping African agriculture. They believe China is expanding long-term geopolitical influence across the Sahel through infrastructure, technology, and economic partnerships. Critics often claim that African countries could become too dependent on Chinese financing, equipment, or technical systems. Others worry that China's growing presence may weaken Western influence in a region already experiencing major political shifts. But supporters of Burkina Faso's current strategy respond with a simple question. If a partnership helps farmers increase production, creates jobs, expands irrigation, modernizes agriculture, and strengthens food security, why should African nations refuse it? For many ordinary people in Burkina Faso, geopolitical debates matter less than practical results. Farmers want functioning equipment. Communities want stable food supplies. Young people want economic opportunities close to home. And this is where the debate becomes more complicated. Because Burkina Faso is not necessarily trying to replace one foreign influence with another. Instead, country appears to be diversifying its international partnerships at a time when many African governments are searching for alternatives to older dependency models. That trend is becoming increasingly visible across parts of West Africa. Countries are looking for investment, technology transfer, infrastructure, and industrial cooperation rather than relying entirely on humanitarian assistance. In that environment, China has positioned itself as a partner focused heavily on production and development projects. Whether this strategy will fully succeed remains uncertain, but one thing is already clear. The political conversation in Africa is changing. More nations are asking how they can build stronger internal economies, reduce vulnerability to external pressure, and gain greater control over food, energy, and strategic resources in the decades ahead. What is happening today in Burkina Faso may offer an important lesson not only for the Sahel, but for many African nations searching for a new path toward stability and independence. For decades, large parts of Africa remained trapped in a difficult cycle. Many countries exported raw materials while importing expensive food products. Agricultural systems stayed underdeveloped. Rural communities lacked irrigation, storage infrastructure, modern machinery, and technical support. As a result, food insecurity continued even in regions with enormous farming potential. Burkina Faso now appears to be trying a different model. Instead of relying entirely on emergency assistance, the country is attempting to strengthen local production capacity. That means investing in tractors, seed technology, irrigation systems, agricultural training, and food processing infrastructure. It also means treating agriculture not as a secondary issue, but as one of the foundations of national resilience. This is one reason why the partnership with China has attracted attention across Africa. SAHEL. Supporters believe the long-term objective is not simply to receive aid. The goal is to help Burkina Faso feed itself, stabilize rural communities, create jobs, and reduce dependence on outside powers. Major obstacles still remain. Security problems continue across parts of the country. Climate conditions remain difficult. Agricultural modernization takes time, resources, and political stability. No foreign partnership alone can solve every structural challenge facing the Sahel. But many Africans are watching Burkina Faso closely because they believe something larger may be developing beneath the surface. They see a country trying to reclaim economic direction through production instead of dependency. And that is where the message of Captain Ibrahim Traore connects strongly with modern Pan-African thinking across the continent. For many supporters of Pan-Africanism, sovereignty is not measured only by speeches at the African Union. It is measured by whether a nation can feed its people, support its farmers, develop local industries, and protect national dignity. Perhaps that is why this story matters far beyond 160 million CFA francs. Because the future of Burkina Faso, and perhaps part of the Africa new generation of leadership, may not begin inside presidential palaces. It may begin in the rice fields, irrigation canals, and farming villages where Ibrahim Traore hopes to build a more self-reliant future. If you believe Africa's future will be shaped by production, dignity, and self-reliance, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. When Somalia's Interior Security Minister arrived in Ouagadougou to meet Captain Ibrahim Traore, many people outside Africa saw it as just another diplomatic visit. But across the continent, the message felt much bigger. A nation that has spent years fighting terrorism was now looking toward Burkina Faso for answers. That alone surprised many observers. For decades, African countries facing insurgencies usually turned first to France, the United States, or international military coalitions. Yet today, some leaders are beginning to look toward another African nation instead. A country once described only through poverty, instability, and violence is suddenly being discussed as a possible model of resistance and security cooperation. Why? Why would Somalia, a nation that has battled al-Shabaab for years, seek closer security ties with Burkina Faso? The answer may reveal a major shift happening inside Africa itself. Under Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso is trying to build something different. Not simply another military campaign against terrorism, but a broader vision based on self-reliance, national dignity, and African-led security cooperation. Supporters believe he is helping Africa rediscover confidence in its own strength after decades of dependency on outside powers. And that is exactly why this story matters far beyond Burkina Faso. Because the real question is no longer whether terrorism exists in Africa. The real question is who Africans now trust to fight it. If you enjoy deep stories about Africa's changing future, remember to subscribe because this channel follows the leaders, movements, and turning points reshaping the continent today. Somalia's visit to Burkina Faso was not symbolic theater. It reflected a growing belief that Ouagadougou may now represent something many African nations have been searching for: a homegrown response to insecurity. The visit from Somalia also carried another message that many international observers immediately understood. Burkina Faso was no longer being treated only as a country in crisis. It was beginning to be viewed as a security partner. Somalia and Burkina Faso share painful similarities. Both nations have spent years fighting extremist groups that attack villages, destroy schools, displace families, and weaken local economies. In both countries, terrorism has become more than a military issue. It has become part of everyday life. For ordinary citizens, the consequences are devastating. Farmers abandon their fields because armed groups control rural roads. Parents fear sending children to school. Entire communities are forced to flee with almost nothing. In many areas, survival itself becomes uncertain. That is why the meeting between Somali officials and Ibrahim Traore mattered so much. Somalia was not simply looking for diplomatic friendship, it was looking for practical cooperation in intelligence sharing, security training, and counterterrorism coordination. And perhaps most importantly, Somalia was looking at a country trying to fight back without depending entirely on foreign military structures. This growing interest in Burkina Faso also reflects frustration across parts of Africa. For years, Western powers promised stability in the Sahel through military operations, foreign bases, and counterterrorism missions. Yet, violence continued spreading across borders. Many Africans began asking difficult questions. If thousands of foreign troops, advanced technology, and international funding could not stop the crisis after so many years, then what exactly needed to change? That question would eventually help transform Ibrahim Traore from a national military leader into a continental political symbol. Across the Sahel, frustration toward Western military strategy did not appear overnight. France maintained a military presence in parts of West Africa for years. The United States also invested heavily in intelligence operations, surveillance programs, and counterterrorism support across the region. But despite all of this, insecurity often became worse instead of better. Armed groups expanded into rural territories. Attacks spread across borders. Millions of civilians were displaced. In some communities, people began feeling that foreign intervention had become permanent, while peace remained temporary. This growing anger fueled massive anti-French demonstrations in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Protesters waved national flags and demanded greater sovereignty over security decisions. Many no longer wanted outside powers deciding the future of African nations. Still, the situation is more complicated than simple slogans. Not every failure can be blamed on Western countries alone. The Sahel crisis is also connected to poverty, corruption, weak state institutions, ethnic tensions, illegal arms trafficking, and decades of political instability. Even the strongest military operation struggles when these deeper problems remain unresolved. That is why Ibrahim Traore's message resonates with many Africans. He argues that security cannot depend only on foreign soldiers or military equipment. A nation must rebuild confidence inside its own population. Citizens must believe they are defending their own homeland, not serving outside interests. For supporters, this is what makes Burkina Faso different. The country is attempting to reconnect national security with national identity itself. And for many Africans watching from outside Burkina Faso, that idea feels more powerful than any foreign speech about stabilization. Instead of waiting for outside armies to solve the crisis, Ibrahim Traore began promoting a different strategy. His government focused on building local resistance networks, strengthening cooperation with neighboring SAHEL states, and involving ordinary citizens in national defense. One of the most important parts of this strategy was the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland program. Thousands of civilians received training to help protect villages and support national security forces. Supporters viewed the program as proof that Burkina Faso was trying to transform the entire population into a force capable of resisting terrorism. To many citizens, this approach restored something they felt had been disappearing for years: national pride. Traore also pushed for stronger regional alliances. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger created the Alliance of Sahel States, often called AES. Together, these countries began discussing intelligence sharing, joint military coordination, and a collective response to extremist violence spreading across the region. This was not just military cooperation, it was also political symbolism. For decades, many African security systems relied heavily on outside funding, foreign military advisors, and international operations. AES represented an attempt to build an African-centered security structure controlled primarily by African governments themselves. Traore repeatedly argued that terrorism cannot be defeated by weapons alone. According to his vision, security must also include food production, economic independence, and stronger local communities. A hungry and desperate population is easier for extremist groups to exploit. That message connected deeply with many ordinary Africans. For them, the fight against terrorism is not only about soldiers on battlefields, it is also about whether families can farm safely, children can attend school, and entire communities can live without fear again. As Ibrahim Traore's influence grew, many Africans began comparing him to Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader who once transformed Burkina Faso into a symbol of African dignity and self-reliance. The comparison is emotional more than political, but it reveals how strongly Traore's image resonates across the continent. He is young, direct, and openly speaks about sovereignty, national pride, and resistance to dependency. In an era when many African citizens feel disappointed by traditional political elites, Traore appears different. To supporters, he looks like a leader, willing to confront pressures that others avoided for decades. This explains why his speeches spread rapidly across African social media platforms. Many young Africans see him as part of a new Pan-African generation. A generation that believes Africa should control its own resources, secure its own borders, and define its own political future without constant outside direction. Still, admiration alone does not solve Burkina Faso's problems. The country continues facing deadly attacks, humanitarian crises, and economic hardship. Large parts of the population remain vulnerable, and security challenges are far from over. Critics argue that strong rhetoric and military mobilization may not guarantee long-term stability. But even critics admit something important. Traore has changed the conversation. Before, many African nations were discussed mainly as victims waiting for foreign intervention. Now, Burkina Faso is attempting to present itself differently, not as a helpless state, but as a country trying to organize its own survival on its own terms. That shift may explain why some Western governments view the growing popularity of Ibrahim Traore with concern. Because if more African nations begin embracing this model of political and security independence, the balance of influence across the continent could change dramatically. Western criticism toward Burkina Faso often focuses on democracy, military governance, and human rights concerns. Some international observers argue that relying too heavily on military structures could weaken civilian institutions over time. Others worry that anti-Western sentiment may isolate countries like Burkina Faso from global partnerships and financial support. These concerns are real and cannot simply be ignored. But supporters of Ibrahim Traore answer with a different question. What should a country do when decades of foreign-backed security strategies fail to stop terrorism? For many citizens in the Sahel, this debate is no longer theoretical. It is personal. Entire generations have grown up surrounded by violence, instability, and uncertainty. In their eyes, waiting for the same solutions to suddenly produce different results no longer makes sense. This is why Traore's message continues spreading beyond Burkina Faso. He represents the belief that African nations should at least have the right to attempt their own path, even if that path carries risks and challenges. To many supporters, sovereignty means little if security decisions are still shaped mostly outside the continent. Somalia's outreach to Burkina Faso may therefore represent something much larger than bilateral cooperation. It may signal the beginning of a broader shift toward African-led security partnerships built on shared experience rather than external supervision. For other African countries, the lesson is becoming harder to ignore. No nation can protect itself permanently if its people feel disconnected from the state, dependent on outside protection, or excluded from national purpose. Security is not only about weapons, it is also about identity, trust, dignity, and belief in a shared future. Somalia's decision to turn toward Burkina Faso may one day be remembered as more than a diplomatic event. It may represent a moment when parts of Africa quietly began changing the direction of their future. Burkina Faso has not defeated terrorism. The country still faces painful losses, dangerous attacks, and enormous economic pressure. But what makes Captain Ibrahim Traore impossible to ignore is not the claim of total victory. It is the determination to pursue a different vision while under pressure from every direction. For many Africans, that determination carries emotional weight. A small nation once viewed mainly through the lens of crisis is now trying to inspire a broader continental movement based on sovereignty, resilience, and cooperation between African states themselves. Somalia's outreach to Ouagadougou reflects growing recognition that African nations may need to rely more on each other in the years ahead. That idea is becoming central to a new wave of Pan-African thinking. In this Africa new generation, security is no longer seen only as a matter of foreign alliances or military hardware. It is tied to dignity, identity, economic survival, and the belief that African people deserve control over their own destiny. Whether people support or criticize Ibrahim Traore, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. He has already changed the conversation inside Africa. Today, Burkina Faso stands at the center of debates about sovereignty, resistance, and the future role of the African Union in protecting the continent from instability and foreign dependency. And for many supporters of Pan-Africanism, Captain Ibrahim Traore has become a symbol of a continent searching for confidence in itself again. Do you believe Ibrahim Traore's model could inspire other African nations? Or will Burkina Faso face the same struggles that challenged previous movements for independence and self-reliance? Share your thoughts below. And subscribe for more deep stories about Africa. Burkina Faso, and the leaders shaping the continent's future. What if the greatest weapon against terrorism is not a rifle, a drone, or a military convoy? What if the most powerful defense of a nation begins inside a home, in the mind of a child, guided by the wisdom of a mother? This is the question that Burkina Faso is forcing many people across Africa to consider today. For years, Burkina Faso has faced one of the most difficult security crises on the African continent. Armed groups have attacked villages, displaced families, and disrupted the lives of millions. Like many countries facing such threats, the immediate response has often focused on military operations and security measures. Yet Ibrahim Traore and his supporters increasingly speak about something deeper. They argue that a nation cannot permanently defeat violence if it ignores the social conditions that allow violence to grow. According to this vision, the future of Burkina Faso will not be decided only by soldiers on the battlefield. It will also be decided by parents in their homes, teachers in classrooms, and especially mothers raising the next generation. The idea is simple but powerful. A child who grows up with education, discipline, hope, and a strong sense of identity is less likely to be attracted by extremist ideologies later in life. If you enjoy exploring the hidden forces shaping Africa's future, be sure to follow this channel and join us on this journey. History has shown that military victories alone do not always create lasting peace. Countries across different regions have defeated armed groups only to see new ones emerge years later. The reason is often the same. The weapons may disappear, but the poverty, hopelessness, and social instability that helped create the conflict remain. Burkina Faso is increasingly promoting the belief that true victory comes when society itself becomes stronger than the forces trying to divide it. A child may spend a few hours each day with teachers, neighbors, or friends, but for many years of life, no influence is stronger than that of a mother. Before a child learns about politics, religion, or society, that child learns values at home. The first lessons about responsibility, respect, discipline, and hard work often come from the person who raises them every day. This is why many experts believe that mothers are among the most important builders of national stability. When a mother has access to education, she is more likely to encourage her children to stay in school. When she has economic opportunities, she can help provide a more secure future for her family. When she understands the importance of critical thinking and community values, she becomes a powerful barrier against extremist influences. Across many regions affected by conflict, researchers have observed a similar pattern. Young people who feel abandoned, hopeless, or disconnected from society are often more vulnerable to recruitment by violent groups. These organizations frequently exploit frustration and poverty, offering a false sense of purpose and belonging. But when a child grows up in a stable home with guidance, support, and hope, the appeal of such messages becomes much weaker. For supporters of Burkina Faso's current direction, this reality carries an important lesson. The battle against terrorism does not begin when a soldier enters combat. It begins years earlier, when a child is learning what kind of person he or she will become. A nation that invests in mothers is investing in the character of its future citizens. This perspective does not place the entire responsibility on women. Fathers, schools, religious leaders, and communities all play important roles. However, the mother often remains the central figure during the most formative years of life. If Burkina Faso wants to build a generation capable of rejecting violence and embracing progress, many believe that empowering mothers is one of the smartest investments the country can make. If military operations represent the visible side of Burkina Faso's struggle for stability, cultural identity represents the less visible side. This is where many observers believe Ibrahim Traore is trying to build a foundation that will last beyond the current security crisis. Supporters of the government often argue that a nation cannot remain strong if its people lose confidence in their own values, traditions, and identity. In their view, national development is not only about roads, factories, or military equipment. It is also about creating citizens who understand who they are and what kind of future they want to build. This perspective helps explain why cultural issues sometimes receive significant attention in public debates. One example was the decision by authorities to prohibit the planned Miss Emerge 2025 event. According to official statements, the activity was considered inconsistent with the moral, social, and cultural values that the government seeks to promote. The decision generated discussion both inside and outside Burkina Faso. Supporters saw the move as part of a broader effort to encourage priorities such as education, professional development, social responsibility, and cultural pride. Critics viewed it differently, arguing that personal freedom should play a larger role in determining social activities, regardless of where one stands in that debate. The decision revealed an important aspect of the government's vision. The larger objective appears to be the creation of a society that is confident in its own identity, rather than one that simply imitates outside models. For Ibrahim Traore and many of his supporters, cultural sovereignty is closely connected to political and economic sovereignty. They believe that a population with strong roots and a clear sense of purpose is better prepared to resist division, manipulation, and instability. In that sense, the discussion is not only about a beauty competition, it is about the kind of citizens Burkina Faso hopes to raise and the values that future generations will inherit. Burkina Faso is not the first country to discover the importance of women in national development. Around the world, several nations have demonstrated that empowering women can strengthen families, improve education, reduce poverty, and create more stable societies. One of the most frequently cited examples is Rwanda. After the devastating genocide of 1994, the country faced the enormous challenge of rebuilding trust, institutions, and communities. Rwanda did not focus exclusively on security measures. It also increased opportunities for women to participate in politics, education, and economic development. Over time, women became central contributors to national reconstruction, helping create one of Africa's most stable and organized societies. Ghana offers another important lesson. While no country is free from challenges, Ghana has long been recognized as one of the more stable democracies in West Africa. Increased access to education for girls and greater participation of women in economic life have contributed to stronger communities and improved social resilience. When families become more economically secure, extremist groups often find it harder to recruit frustrated young people. Examples can also be found outside Africa. In Bangladesh, programs supporting women's education and entrepreneurship helped millions of families improve their living conditions. In Indonesia, community-based education initiatives involving mothers and local leaders have played a role in reducing the influence of extremist narratives in certain regions. These experiences share a common lesson. Long-term stability is not created solely by military victories. It is built through families, schools, and communities. Every child who remains in school, instead of dropping out, represents a small victory. Every mother who gains the skills to support her family contributes to national resilience. For supporters of Burkina Faso's current approach, these international examples reinforce a simple belief. Investing in women is not only a social policy, it is also an investment in security, stability, and the future strength of the nation. As Burkina Faso pursues its own path, not everyone agrees with the direction being taken. Some international observers, media organizations, and political commentators have criticized aspects of the government's approach, particularly when cultural policies become part of national development strategies. One common criticism is that restrictions on certain activities may reduce individual freedom. Critics argue that citizens should have broad authority to make personal choices about entertainment, fashion, and cultural participation. From this perspective, government involvement in cultural matters can appear excessive or unnecessary. However, supporters of Burkina Faso's approach respond with a different argument. They believe that every nation has the right to define the values it considers important for its future. Just as countries protect their borders and economic interests, they also have the right to protect cultural priorities that reflect their history and social realities. Another criticism suggests that cultural policies have little connection to security challenges. Opponents argue that terrorism is primarily a military problem requiring military solutions, yet supporters counter that this view overlooks the deeper causes of instability. Armed groups do not recruit people from a vacuum. They often target communities struggling with poverty, social fragmentation, weak education, and limited opportunities. From this perspective, strengthening families and promoting positive social values are not alternatives to security operations. They are complementary strategies. Soldiers may stop an attack today, but strong communities can help prevent future generations from being drawn into violence. Many people in Burkina Faso also reject the idea that foreign observers should determine the country's development priorities. They argue that African nations should be free to experiment with solutions rooted in their own cultures and experiences. Whether one agrees or disagrees with the government's methods, an important debate is taking place. The discussion is no longer only about how to defeat terrorists on the battlefield, it is also about how to build a society where terrorism finds fewer opportunities to grow in the first place. To understand why many supporters view Ibrahim Traore differently from traditional political leaders, it is important to look beyond current events and examine the broader vision that surrounds his leadership. For many Burkinabe citizens, the fight against terrorism is only one chapter in a much larger national transformation. Traore frequently speaks about sovereignty, self-reliance, production, education, and national dignity. His supporters argue that these ideas are connected. A country cannot be truly secure if it depends entirely on others for its economy. It cannot be truly independent if it loses confidence in its culture. And it cannot guarantee its future if its young people grow up without purpose or opportunity. This thinking has led many observers to compare elements of Traore's message with the legacy of Thomas Sankara. One of Burkina Faso's most respected historical figures, Sankara believed that national development required active participation from all citizens, including women. He viewed education, productive work, and social responsibility as essential pillars of a strong nation. Within this framework, mothers occupy a special place. Soldiers can defend territory. Governments can build infrastructure. Businesses can create jobs. But mothers help shape the attitudes, values, and ambitions of the next generation. That is why many supporters see family development as a strategic investment rather than merely a social issue. The broader vision, often described as the popular progressive revolution, seeks to connect security, culture, education, and economic development into a single national project. Instead of treating these issues separately, the goal is to strengthen each one at the same time. A safer country supports better education. Better education supports economic growth. Economic growth strengthens families. Strong families help create stable communities. For supporters of Ibrahim Traore, this is the real objective. The ultimate victory will not simply be measured by territory recovered from armed groups. It will be measured by the emergence of a new generation that is educated, confident, productive, and committed to building a stronger Burkina Faso for decades to come. The story of Burkina Faso raises a question that extends far beyond one country. What truly creates lasting security? Is it only military strength, or is it also the strength of families, communities, and the values passed from one generation to the next? The argument emerging from many supporters of Ibrahim Traore is clear. Terrorism is not defeated only when armed groups lose territory. It is defeated when young people gain opportunities, when families become stronger, and when communities provide hope instead of despair. In this vision, mothers become far more than caregivers. They become guardians of the future. A well-educated mother can influence an entire family. A family built on stability and purpose can influence a community. When millions of families move in the same direction, they can transform a nation. This is why many observers believe that investments in education, women, and cultural identity should be viewed not only as social policies, but also as long-term security strategies. Burkina Faso's experience also offers a broader lesson for Africa. Every nation facing insecurity must eventually answer the same question. How do you prevent the next generation from becoming vulnerable to violence? Military operations may address immediate threats, but education, opportunity, and family development help address the deeper causes. Whether one agrees with every policy or not, the larger debate remains important. It challenges governments to think beyond short-term victories and focus on building societies capable of sustaining peace for decades. For many supporters of Pan-African ideals, this discussion reflects a larger movement taking shape across the continent. They see Burkina Faso and Captain Ibrahim Traore as symbols of an Africa new movement that seeks greater self-confidence and self-determination. They believe that Pan-Africanism, regional cooperation through the African Union, and stronger national institutions can help create a more secure future. In their eyes, Ibrahim Traore represents not only a political leader, but also a reminder that lasting change begins with people, families, and communities. If Africa hopes to build a stronger tomorrow, the journey may indeed begin with the mothers who shape the citizens of the future. If you found this perspective valuable, share your thoughts below and follow the channel for more discussions about Burkina Faso, Pan-African development, and the ideas shaping Africa's future. What if one of Africa's poorest nations stopped waiting for foreign investors, international lenders, and multinational corporations to shape its future? What if ordinary citizens became the owners of the factories, farms, and industries that power their economy? That is exactly the experiment unfolding in Burkina Faso under Captain Ibrahim Traore. While many African countries continue to rely heavily on foreign capital to finance development, Burkina Faso is attempting something far more ambitious. Through a program known as popular shareholding, hundreds of thousands of citizens are being invited to become direct stakeholders in national economic projects. For decades, Africa has faced a painful contradiction. The continent possesses enormous natural wealth, yet many countries remain dependent on exporting raw materials while importing finished products at higher prices. Burkina Faso has not escaped this reality. The country produces agricultural goods, livestock, and gold. Yet much of the value generated from those resources has historically left the country. Traore's response is built around a simple but powerful question. If Burkina Faso has resources, workers, farmers, and entrepreneurs, why should it always wait for outsiders to finance its development? This question challenges one of the most common assumptions about economic growth in Africa. Rather than asking who will invest in Burkina Faso, the government is asking how Burkinabe citizens can invest in themselves. The goal is not only to raise money, It is to transform the role of citizens within the economy. Instead of remaining consumers, taxpayers, and workers, they are encouraged to become shareholders and co-owners of national development projects. If you enjoy exploring bold economic ideas that could reshape Africa's future, make sure to subscribe and join us for more stories like this. Popular shareholding did not appear out of nowhere. Although many international observers describe it as a new economic experiment, its roots reach deep into African traditions and Burkina Faso's own history. For generations, communities across West Africa survived through collective effort. Families worked shared fields, cared for communal livestock, and contributed labor to projects that benefited everyone. Wealth was often understood not only as an individual achievement, but also as a collective responsibility. The success of one household strengthened the entire community. Supporters of popular shareholding argue that Ibrahim Traore is adapting this traditional spirit to the modern economy. Instead of asking villagers to work together on a communal farm, the model encourages citizens to pool financial resources and become shareholders in enterprises that serve national development goals. The intellectual foundation of this idea is also linked to long-standing debates about African economic independence. Thinkers such as Laurent Bedo promoted the concept of community entrepreneurship as a way to mobilize local resources rather than relying exclusively on external funding. Their argument was simple: a nation that cannot finance its own productive sectors will struggle to control its own future. Many observers also see echoes of the philosophy associated with Thomas Sankara. During the 1980s, Sankara emphasized self-reliance, local production, and dignity through work. While the economic tools are different today, the underlying message remains familiar. Development should begin with the people themselves. What makes Traore's approach unique is the attempt to transform a cultural value into a modern financial mechanism. Citizens are not simply encouraged to support development in theory. They are invited to participate directly through ownership. This distinction matters. A factory funded by community shareholders is viewed differently from one financed entirely by foreign investors. For supporters, it creates a stronger connection between economic growth and national responsibility. The project becomes more than a business venture. It becomes a symbol of collective ambition and shared destiny. At first glance, many people compare Ibrahim Traore's economic vision to the model that helped transform Norway into one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Both approaches begin with a similar principle. National resources should benefit the population rather than a small elite or foreign interests. Norway used revenues from its oil and gas sector to build a massive national wealth fund. The state collected and managed those resources on behalf of the population, creating long-term financial security for future generations. It is often presented as one of the most successful examples of resource management in modern history. Burkina Faso shares the same desire for economic sovereignty, but Traore is attempting something fundamentally different. Instead of relying primarily on the state to manage wealth for citizens, he is encouraging citizens to become direct participants in the creation of that wealth. This distinction may seem subtle, but it changes the entire relationship between people and the economy. In the traditional model, citizens benefit indirectly through public services, infrastructure, and government spending. In the Burkinabe model, citizens are invited to become shareholders in projects that seek to generate economic value. Supporters argue that this approach goes beyond ownership on paper. It creates a sense of responsibility and engagement. When people own a stake in a factory, an agricultural project, or a mining enterprise, they may feel a stronger interest in its success. Traore's innovation lies in combining modern investment mechanisms with a community-centered culture. Rather than copying a European model, he has adapted the principle of shared prosperity to local realities. The goal is not merely to distribute wealth after it is created. The goal is to involve citizens in creating that wealth from the beginning. For this reason, many observers believe Burkina Faso is not building a version of Norway. It is attempting to create something uniquely African, shaped by its own history, traditions, and development challenges. Turning an idea into reality required more than speeches and patriotic slogans. To make popular shareholding work, Burkina Faso needed an institution capable of organizing investments, managing subscriptions, and connecting citizens to national development projects. That institution became the Agency for the Promotion of Community Entrepreneurship, widely known as APEC. Created in 2023, APEC was designed to provide the legal and operational framework for community-owned enterprises. Its mission is straightforward but ambitious. It seeks to mobilize domestic savings, identify productive projects, and channel citizen investments into sectors considered essential for national development. One of the most remarkable aspects of the program is its accessibility. Participation is not reserved for wealthy investors or large corporations. Farmers, workers, retirees, small business owners, students, and members of the diaspora can all become shareholders. This broad participation is central to the philosophy behind the initiative. Economic transformation should involve the population as a whole, rather than a limited group of elites. The response has been significant. Hundreds of thousands of Burkinabe citizens have joined the program, while billions of CFA francs have been mobilized to support community enterprises. These figures suggest that many people are willing to contribute financially when they believe they have a direct stake in the outcome. The participation of the diaspora has also played an important role. Burkinabe citizens living abroad are encouraged to invest in projects from their countries of residence, allowing them to contribute to development without returning home permanently. For supporters, the success of APEC is measured by more than the money collected. It represents a shift in mentality. Citizens are no longer viewed simply as beneficiaries of development programs. They are becoming partners in the process. Whether this model ultimately succeeds or fails, it has already changed the conversation about who should finance the future of Burkina Faso. The true test of any economic vision is not the number of speeches delivered or the amount of money collected. The real test is whether tangible results appear on the ground. In Burkina Faso, supporters of popular shareholding point to a growing list of projects that aim to prove the model can move from theory to reality. One of the most visible examples is the development of tomato processing facilities. For years, Burkina Faso produced large quantities of tomatoes, yet the country still depended heavily on imported tomato products. This situation reflected a broader challenge faced by many African economies. Raw materials were produced locally, but much of the value-added processing occurred elsewhere. The new factories seek to change that equation. Instead of exporting agricultural products in their raw form, Burkina Faso aims to process more of them domestically. Supporters believe this approach can create jobs, strengthen local industries, and reduce dependence on imported goods. Agriculture is not the only target. The broader program also includes agricultural mechanization initiatives, centralized purchasing systems for agricultural products, and semi-mechanized mining projects. Each project is designed around the same principle. Resources generated within the country should contribute more directly to national prosperity. The expected benefits extend beyond production figures. New industries can create employment opportunities for young people, provide more stable markets for farmers, and encourage additional investment in local supply chains. Instead of exporting value, the country seeks to retain more of it within its borders. For many citizens, these projects represent something larger than economic development. They symbolize the possibility of transforming Burkina Faso from a supplier of raw materials into a producer of finished goods. Whether that transformation succeeds remains to be seen. But the ambition behind it is undeniable. It is an attempt to build industrial growth with the participation of the people themselves. Not everyone is convinced that popular shareholding will deliver the results its supporters expect. As the program gains attention, it has also attracted criticism from international observers, economists, and commentators who question whether such an ambitious experiment can succeed over the long term. One concern involves governance. Critics argue that collecting money from hundreds of thousands of citizens is only the beginning. The greater challenge is ensuring that projects are managed efficiently, transparently, and profitably. Without strong oversight, public trust could be damaged. Others point to financial risk. Any investment carries uncertainty, and not every factory, agricultural enterprise, or mining project will automatically become successful. Some observers worry that ordinary citizens could face disappointment if certain projects fail to meet expectations. Supporters of the initiative respond that risk exists in every development strategy. They argue that dependence on foreign loans, external aid, and imported products also carries significant risks. From this perspective, popular shareholding is not risk-free, but neither is the status quo. Another criticism is that community-owned enterprises may struggle to compete against large international corporations. Yet supporters note that many successful industrial nations protected and supported domestic industries during their early stages of development. Ultimately, the debate reflects two different visions of economic progress. One emphasizes integration into existing global financial structures. The other seeks to build stronger domestic ownership and control over productive sectors. Whether popular shareholding becomes a historic success or an important lesson remains uncertain. What is clear is that Burkina Faso has opened a conversation that extends far beyond its borders. The question is no longer whether Africans can participate in development. The question is whether they can become owners of it. Whether popular shareholding ultimately succeeds or fails will only be known years from now. Economic transformation is never measured in months. It is measured in generations. Yet even at this early stage, the experiment taking place in Burkina Faso has already captured attention across Africa because it challenges assumptions that many people considered unquestionable for decades. Development discussions often focused on attracting foreign investment, securing international loans, and obtaining external assistance. Ibrahim Traore has not rejected cooperation with the outside world, but he has placed a different question at the center of the conversation. What happens when citizens themselves become investors in national development? That question may prove to be the most important aspect of this entire project. Factories can be built, programs can change, governments can come and go, but a population that begins to see itself as an owner rather than a spectator may develop a completely different relationship with the economy. The broader lesson for Africa is not that every country should copy Burkina Faso's model exactly. Each nation has its own history, institutions, and challenges. The lesson is that development becomes more powerful when people feel personally connected to it. Citizens are more likely to support economic transformation when they believe they share both the responsibility and the rewards. Captain Ibrahim Traore is attempting to turn that idea into reality by linking ownership, participation, and industrial development. He is testing a model that many countries have discussed, but few have attempted on such a scale. History will determine whether this vision fulfills its promise. Yet, one fact is already clear. Burkina Faso has launched one of the most closely watched economic experiments in modern Africa. For supporters of Pan-African development, Africa New Thinking, Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore, the African Union, Pan-Africanism, and Ibrahim Traore's vision of economic sovereignty. The outcome could influence debates across the continent for years to come. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. Your perspective may be part of the conversation shaping Africa's future.